You're listening to Uptown Radio. It's Thursday, February 10th. I'm Lucy Grindon.
And I'm Mark Gilchrist.
New York State's mask mandate ends today. Are city businesses ready to ditch the KN95s?
Starting today, we're not going to fight customers. We're going to let people make their own decisions.
For the past month, kids 5 to 11 have been getting vaccinated. We'll visit one Brooklyn neighborhood where many parents still aren't ready to get their kids the shot.
There's a lot of concerns about the vaccine and not a lot of concern about COVID in young children.
Also today, medical school graduates are in high demand, but some worry that studying during a pandemic has left them less than fully prepared.
I felt really unconfident in my physical exam skills. I felt like, can I find the heart every time?
Plus, auditions for live theater are going pre-recorded, and that's a challenge for some New York performers.
All this and more on Uptown Radio. But first, the news.
Live from NPR News, I'm Lakshmi Singh. The job market may be growing, but people's buying power isn't. Today, the Labor Department announced that inflation in January surged 7.5% compared to a year earlier. It's the biggest annual increase since the start of the Reagan administration. Traveling with President Biden in Virginia today, NPR's Asma Khalid reports on the Democrats' reaction to the inflation report, days after he celebrated another report that showed the U.S. economy gained a higher than expected 467,000 jobs.
The president is highlighting the work he says the White House is doing to lower prescription drug costs. Even though his so-called Build Back Better agenda seems stuck in the Senate, Biden is focusing on its potential to reduce costs for families rather than the immediate impact of inflation. The president does acknowledge, though, that food and gas prices are up.
I'm going to work like the devil to bring gas prices down, which I'm going to work in to make sure that we keep strengthening the supply chains to bring the cost of energy and everything else and the goods that come to America down.
Biden insists there's other ways to raise people's standards of living by cutting the cost of health care and child care. Asma Khalid, NPR News, Culpeper, Virginia.
Another kind of vaccine appears to be effective for protecting adolescents against COVID-19. NPR's Rob Stein has details.
The vaccine is made by a Maryland company called Novavax. Instead of injecting people with genetic material from the virus, the Novavax vaccine uses a tiny piece of the virus itself, the spike protein the virus uses to infect cells. The company has already asked the Food and Drug Administration to authorize the vaccine for adults. Now, the company says a study involving more than 2,000 volunteers shows that the vaccine is also highly effective at safely protecting those ages 12 to 17 against the Delta variant. In addition, the company says lab studies indicate the vaccine also protects against the Omicron variant. So the company is planning to ask for authorization for that age group next. Rob Stein, NPR News.
Days after meeting with President Biden, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz is warning Russia of serious economic and political consequences if the Kremlin does not pull back its forces from Ukraine's border. But Germany's role is complicated. It risks jeopardizing its gas pipeline deal with Russia. President Biden had said that the project would be halted if Russia invades its neighbor. NPR's Jackie Northam speaks to why Germans may not like the U.S.'s position.
A large part of the population does back this. The last government under Chancellor Angela Merkel was a huge proponent for the pipeline, and the current government under Chancellor Olaf Scholz doesn't appear wholeheartedly to back the project. There are indications that Germany really doesn't like the U.S. dictating what it should and should not be doing about Nord Stream 2.
That's NPR's Jackie Northam reporting. You're listening to NPR News.
From Columbia Radio News in New York, I'm Clara Sophia Daly. Today, the mask mandate was lifted by Governor Hochul. Masks will no longer be required in most businesses, but will still be mandated in New York City schools, healthcare facilities, and on public transit. This comes in response to the continued decline of infections and hospitalization rates in the city. Some New Yorkers are getting a surprise when they open their gas and electric bills this month. Con Edison customers are seeing their energy costs jump dramatically. Spencer Morin, a Brooklyn resident, told CBS 2 his bill went up $200.
I've never seen my electric bill ever go above $400, even on a bad month. So to see it jump up to $550 was strange and not welcome.
Con Edison says the cost of natural gas is to blame for the rate increases. Con Ed spokesperson Jamie McShane.
We don't generate electricity and we don't control the cost of it. We don't make a profit off of it.
Earlier this week, State Senator Michael Generis and 12 council members sent a letter to the Public Service Commission demanding an investigation into the increase. A report released by the city comptroller has outlined the impact of the pandemic on school employees. The Department of Education has lost over 6,000 employees since the start of the pandemic. About 2,000 of those job losses were teachers who have reported high levels of burnout since remote learning began in March 2020. Employees at 3 Starbucks locations in New York filed a petition to unionize today. They joined more than 60 other Starbucks stores that have joined Workers United, an affiliate of the Service Employees International Union. This weekend, New York City will be looking sunny with some clouds, shaping up to be a fairly nice February weekend. Clara Sophia Daly, Columbia Radio News.
This is Uptown Radio. I'm Mark Gilchrist.
And I'm Lucy Grindon. Governor Kathy Hochul came to New York City today as part of a tour to promote her infrastructure plan. But she was greeted by protesters who were upset about one project in particular. Kelly Cannaday reports.
When Congress passed its $1 trillion infrastructure package, Governor Hochul said she was the first one in line to get some of the money for New York.
My first couple weeks on the job, I went right to Washington, met Mitch Landrieu, who had just been named the czar of infrastructure. I was the first governor who showed up in his office, and I said, if I'm the first, I want the most.
The governor was talking at an event put on by Cornell University in New York City to talk about how the state will spend the infrastructure money. Hochul says they want to use it on highways, airport improvements, and new rail tunnels for freight.
We are the beneficiaries and stewards of this infusion of money, and it does fit perfectly in with the priorities that we've had on the books, but also those that I've embraced as governor in the last 6 months. It gives us part of an opportunity to rethink many facets of our economy.
Outside of Governor Hochul's speech on infrastructure, 24 protesters from environmental groups were upset about one particular issue, Bitcoin mining plants. They were asking the governor for a moratorium on Bitcoin mining in New York State because they say it uses too much energy and destroys the environment. Specifically, the protesters were upset about the Greenwich power plant in New York's Finger Lake region. This plant was converted to a Bitcoin mine by a private equity firm, and it uses gas from fracking. Eric Weltman is leading the protest. He's a senior organizer with the group, Food and Water Action.
We cannot meet New York's climate goals by continuing to allow fracked gas to be extracted and burned for this extremely energy-intensive process known as proof-of-work cryptocurrency mining, which is basically the method used by Bitcoin.
Mining is the process in which Bitcoin is created and accounted for. The transactions are recorded by a decentralized blockchain platform. Miners compete in this registration process by solving cryptographic puzzles, after which the winner is awarded Bitcoin. Mining rigs are used to solve the problems more quickly. Weltman says he isn't against cryptocurrency, just the way it's polluting the environment in New York State.
Here's the bottom line. New York can still maintain its edge on innovative finance without risking climate catastrophe.
Inside the event, Governor Hochul did not respond specifically to the protesters. She did, however, note that the infrastructure money will also be used for environmental projects.
We're going to continue to do everything we can while we are given the responsibility of protecting our planet for future generations.
Environmental groups say they will keep up the pressure on the governor to stop the Bitcoin mining. Kelly Cannaday, Columbia Radio News.
Of all the neighborhoods in New York, Borough Park has the lowest vaccination rate. Last month, vaccines became available for children aged 5 to 11, and some healthcare workers are concerned that many parents in the area won't get their kids the shot. Jillian Abraham has the story.
On a sunny morning, yellow buses pull up to a Borough Park school. The boys are wearing yarmulkes with traditional curls, and the girls with long dresses. All the kids joyfully pile out of the bus and into the school. But some healthcare workers worry that most of the younger kids in this Orthodox Jewish community are not yet vaccinated.
I think for 5 to 11, that number is much, much lower.
That is Bleemy Marcus. She is a nurse practitioner who lives and practices in Borough Park. She says since the vaccine became available for 5 to 11-year-olds, she's had limited success encouraging parents to get their children vaccinated.
There's a lot of concerns about the vaccine and not a lot of concern about COVID in young children. And from interactions with people, they don't see any benefit to vaccinating their children.
The New York City Department of Health doesn't have the data yet on vaccination rates among 5 to 11-year-olds in the city, but less than a third of kids aged 11 to 17 in Borough Park have been vaccinated so far. Marcus says misinformation is rampant in the community, and she thinks it's a big source of hesitancy.
There are a lot of advertisements, either physical papers hung up around the community, as well as a lot of things going around electronically via WhatsApp, and also advertised in magazines.
She says the solution is to try to counter misinformation and build trust. She's active on social media and regularly sets up booths on streets to answer questions and hand out literature. But she also remains surprised to see the hesitancy spread in the Orthodox community.
Leading rabbis everywhere have encouraged vaccination and following public health guidelines. And one of the biggest laws in Judaism is saving a life and doing anything possible to save a life. You can violate the commandments to save a life. So that's very much emphasized.
The only way to solve the problem, she says, is through leadership, accountability, removal of misinformation, and trust. Julian Abraham, Columbia Radio News.
Monday is Valentine's Day, as every store or your partner will remind you, but lesser known is the day before Valentine's Day. Some call it Galentine's Day. Galentine's Day was invented on the sitcom Parks and Recreation. The character Leslie Knope says it's an occasion for, quote, ladies celebrating ladies. There are dozens of Galentine's Day events happening in the city this weekend. There's a Galentine's Day cruise, a Galentine's Day kickboxing party, and even a Galentine's Day bottomless drag brunch. Joining me now is Lynn Minert. She's the academic director at the Tisch Center of Hospitality at NYU, and she's worked with lots of restaurateurs. Professor Minert, thank you so much for talking to us about this holiday.
Thank you for having me.
There are a number of fictional holidays invented by TV shows. Festivus from Seinfeld springs to mind. So how common is it for a fictional holiday to become a real-world marketing opportunity for restaurants and other businesses?
Any kind of holiday, in a sense, is a social construct that we all agree to celebrate, right? Like Valentine's Day. And of course, as a commercial organization, like a restaurant, you want to take advantage of it, particularly if they fall during a really quiet time. January, February is a dead time for restaurants. Everyone's eaten enough over the holidays. So this kind of holiday, I'm not surprised that they would jump on.
Why do you think Galentine's Day has had particular success?
Well, I think women are usually very happy to spend time together, to be vulnerable, and to also support one another in a very obvious and visible way, right? Something that men, unfortunately, don't always feel they can do in the same way, that society doesn't, right, accept that in the same way as women. I'm not sure if we were to come up with a bromance day whether people would necessarily react the same way, which is sad for the guys, because I wish they could hang out and have a good time together just like the girls.
Is promoting weird, obscure, or fictional holidays as a strategy something that you have ever talked about with students?
Well, we have, in a sense. Restaurant Week started out like that. Restaurant Week started here in New York as a way just to get people to eat out in January when nobody wants to eat out. It's not necessarily a holiday, but now it does feel like a thing, a tradition, as something that we celebrate, right? Now, one thing I did want to say is, had the restaurant industry been at the heart of this, they would have made sure that Galentine's Day was during the week, because a Sunday is a pretty strong day for restaurants anyway. So had it been purely a restaurant initiative, they would have made sure it would have been like on a Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday, when usually a restaurant's not as busy. So the fact that it comes from a TV show, I think makes it a bit less purely commercial and more something that is serendipitous and fun.
You've lived and worked in Belgium and in the UK. Does anyone in the rest of the world know about or celebrate this holiday?
I don't think it's as prominent yet. What the US is particularly brilliant at is marketing something pretty simple as something groundbreaking and new and innovative. And I think it will spread, yes. I can see my friends back home being very much in love with this concept.
Do you have any plans to celebrate Galentine's Day yourself?
I didn't before, but now that I've spoken to you, I think I might.
Well, happy Galentine's Day in advance, and thank you so much for talking to us.
Thank you.
That was Lynn Minert, professor at NYU's Tisch Center of Hospitality.
January is a busy month for actors. That's when the bulk of the auditions for summer shows are held. But like so many other things, auditions have gone remote, adding another hurdle to an extremely difficult process. Emily Schutz has the story.
Twist for Sarge.
Dancer Cameron Ha is rehearsing an audition in a Midtown studio. The room is large and bright. A camera is set up on a tripod about 10 feet away. If this were pre-pandemic, she would attend dance calls in person. But since theaters opened back up, casting directors have required audition tapes.
January was self-tape city. Probably I was in the studio, if not once a week, twice a week, which definitely got expensive.
Self-tapes are typical for TV and film auditions, but haven't been used for theater until now. Ha prefers renting studio space over filming at home because she thinks it looks better to casting directors. And theater professionals seem to agree. Peter Fernandez is an actor and theater professor at Columbia University.
The more professional you come off, the better you look. It's probably not good to audition for Juliet on camera in a washroom with a bunch of dirty clothes next to you and no decent sound.
But Ha isn't sure how long she can keep this up. For every audition, she has to rent studio space at $30 to $60 an hour.
It's definitely not sustainable. I mean, just having to rent studio space makes it inherently disadvantaging people who may not have the financial means to get in a studio.
Other performers film their auditions in their rooms or outside in the cold. Danielle Berman is a musical theater performer. She's filming an audition tape in the corner of her New York apartment bedroom and adapted the routine to fit in a tight space, walking in place over traveling. Even so, her feet are cut off from the frame, and at times so are her arms.
In just the month of January alone, I submitted 38 videos.
Berman says she'd rather film her auditions at home and save money to polish her dance training.
And if I'm going to spend $30 on a studio space, then that's $30 that can't go towards a class.
Liz Lewis is a casting director working on theater in New York. She says that during the pandemic, self-tape auditions are the only way to stay safe.
Although everybody doesn't want it to, but right now, with the way things are at this moment, it will stick around for a bit.
But Peter Fernandez thinks self-tape auditions might be here to stay, even after the pandemic fades. He says casting companies are saving time and money with the new self-taping process.
It is cheaper and much quicker for those who are actually seeking talent. They don't have to rent space anymore. Self-tape is the future.
For this season at least, performers are rolling cameras in hopes of landing their big break. Emily Schutz, Columbia Radio News.
There are quite a few different species of ducks that come every year during winter time and spend the winter here.
Melody Andres, Central Park birdwatcher.
I do it several times a week because every day is different. Some day, you walk away empty, and other days it's Christmas. A lot of people walk around looking down, and the sidewalks don't change much, but if you look up or be aware of movement and details, and it's amazing. I always enjoy the raptors, so seeing the hawks, the many hawks that we have, or maybe an occasional owl, that's really the trophy. New Yorkers have fallen in love with pale male, the first red-tailed hawk that was seen nesting in Manhattan, and he's still around, and it's always wonderful to see him survive. It's wonderful to have this as a backyard.
You're listening to Uptown Radio from Columbia Radio News, Thursdays at 4 p.m.
From Columbia Radio News in New York, I'm Clara Grundel. The U.S. government is reporting record high inflation numbers. Prices in the economy are up 7.5% over the last year. This marks the largest 12-month increase in prices since the 1980s. Inflation is hitting every aspect of the economy, from food to energy. The increased cost of living is undermining the positive developments in the labor market. Unemployment is down and wages are up, but if everything is more expensive, that can cancel out the progress. The Canadian trucker protest is impacting American carmakers. The truckers are slowing traffic on vital U.S.-Canada trade route, cutting off supplies for critical parts heading south. The truckers are primarily protesting the Canadian vaccine mandate. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki last night expressed concerns about the disruption.
We support peaceful protest, but we have concerns when those protests turn violent. And certainly I think it's important for everyone in Canada and the United States to understand what the impact of this blockage is.
Ford, Toyota, and General Motors report that they have been forced to cut production. Today, Russia began military exercises in neighboring country Belarus. The Russian Defense Ministry issued a statement that the point of the exercises is to practice repelling external aggression with a defensive operation. Also today, United Kingdom Prime Minister Boris Johnson expressed ongoing concern over Russia's military buildup on Ukraine's border.
This is probably the most dangerous moment, I would say, in the course of the next few days, in what is the biggest security crisis that Europe has faced for decades.
This was the message from Johnson on a visit to NATO headquarters. The stock market dropped today on the inflation news, with the S&P down 1.5%. For Columbia Radio News, I'm Clara Grundel.
This is Uptown Radio. I'm Mark Gilchrist.
And I'm Lucy Grindon. Governor Kathy Hochul let the statewide indoor mask mandate expire this morning, but the CDC continues to recommend the use of face coverings indoors in public, and many New York City rules remain in place. Masks are still required on the subway, in theaters, and in public schools, but some small businesses are allowed to let customers shop mask-free. Linnea Arden asks if they're ready to take that step.
Kari Biven-Pedersen is the general manager at Amsterdam Wine Co. on the Upper West Side. He says the change was too hasty. He's still worried about his friends and coworkers catching COVID.
And to have to tell adults to please just wear a mask for like 5 minutes while you're getting your wine is a real pain. Just do your part, people.
But because the state law has lapsed, it's now up to small businesses like his, ones that don't require vaccination cards to enter, to decide what to do.
I'm personally a little disappointed, as it has been a chore to deal with customers over the past 2 years as the mandate has come and gone.
Biven-Pedersen's main concern is that a lot of his customers are elderly, so he's still planning on asking his shoppers to wear masks. But he hadn't had to tell anyone to put a mask on yet. There aren't a lot of wine shoppers at 10 a.m. Meanwhile, just a few blocks north at Town Shop, the mood was festive.
Starting today, we're not going to fight customers.
Danny Coach is the fourth-generation owner of Town Shop, a lingerie store.
So we're going to let people make their own decisions. We've been policing for over a year now, and it's exhausting. That sign in the window, I am going to take that down. I have a new sign that someone made this morning for me that says, "We would prefer you wear a mask, but we will not fight you." That's the message that's going to be on the door in about 10 minutes.
But Valentine's Day is coming up, the shop's biggest holiday. Is Coach worried about a bunch of maskless customers crowding the aisles?
We're guinea pigs again, and we're going to hope for the best. And I'm optimistic that it's going to be okay. But yes, it would be better if it didn't happen right before Valentine's Day.
On the street outside, shopper Emma Smith says the picking and choosing of when to wear a mask seems silly.
So if I go in and I see people are not, I'm not going to, because I don't think it makes sense. There's no difference between a restaurant and a store. Actually, restaurants are probably packed more. So that it's ridiculous. I'm a Jew from Germany. We don't like following, any laws just without reflecting on them first.
But Smith is a New Yorker now. And it looks like, along with much of the rest of the city, it'll be a while longer before New Yorkers need to worry if they've got anything stuck in their teeth. Linnea Arden, Columbia Radio News.
There's a shortage of healthcare workers in the United States. A fifth have quit their jobs since the start of the pandemic. In the fall, Governor Hochul declared a disaster emergency due to healthcare staffing shortages, and that means all eyes on new medical school grads. However, as David Newtown finds, some med students say the pandemic is affecting their ability to receive the best possible training.
Ruhi Shah is a 24-year-old med student in New York City. Shah says her classes were online last year, but she says in a normal year, students like her would get to practice hands-on skills in person 1 day a week.
And that was something that my class missed out on almost entirely.
Without that practice, Shah says she doesn't feel confident in her physical exam skills. We're not sharing the name of her school because Shah is hoping to work there as a doctor after she graduates, and she's worried about jeopardizing her chances. This is Shah's third year, and students are expected to be in the hospital full-time. They rotate every few weeks between specialties like anesthesia, family medicine, and transplant surgery. Shah says the transition from being on Zoom has been stark.
I felt really unconfident in my physical exam skills. I felt like, can I find the heart every time? It just felt like it feels like there are a lot of skills where repetition is really key, and going in, I was freaking out like the week before we started because I was like, I feel like I just don't know how to do things. It was a really hard pivot.
Shah knows medical school is hard, but pandemic medical school is harder. According to a study from Yale, rates of anxiety in med students during 2020 increased by more than 60% compared to a typical year. Shah says she's worried that the specific challenges pandemic-era students face are being overlooked.
When I share this experience with like older students or residents, a lot of people will say like, of course it's overwhelming.
When asked about the possibility that medical students missed out on critical hands-on training during the pandemic, two top New York City schools, NYU and Columbia, didn't respond to emailed queries. But a representative from Weill Cornell Medicine said their med students worked through the pandemic. And despite the risk of COVID, the school made sure its students got the hands-on training they need. But there's another problem for med students which the pandemic may have highlighted. Dr. Shara Sand is a psychologist on the Upper West Side. She sees patients who work in healthcare.
There's no allowance for self-care. We preach to our patients to take care of themselves, and we as psychologists and physicians don't seem to do it very well for ourselves.
Shah says she has some things which bring her comfort. Walking in the park, cooking, chatting with her roommates. But she knows she has a lot of work ahead of her.
I suspect that some of these things will be a lot harder in residency.
Shah has 1.5 years until then. In the meantime, she's doing what med students do and working many hours. David Newtown, Columbia Radio News.
The New York Giants are being sued, along with the NFL, the Denver Broncos, and the Miami Dolphins. Bringing the suit is former Miami Dolphins head coach Brian Flores, who is both black and Hispanic. Flores accuses the Giants and Broncos of racist hiring practices. He claims both teams fraudulently interviewed him for head coaching jobs that he was not actually being considered for in order to satisfy the NFL's Rooney Rule. Michael McCann is director of the Sports and Entertainment Law Institute at the University of New Hampshire Franklin Pierce School of Law, and was a legal analyst and writer at Sports Illustrated magazine for more than a decade. I asked him to explain what the Rooney Rule is and why it is now being challenged in this lawsuit.
And the Rooney Rule is designed to guarantee that teams will interview minority candidates for high-ranking positions. And the logic behind the rule is that by interviewing candidates the team otherwise wouldn't interview, they're going to meet someone they might really like and hire that person. So the logic of it is, I would say, very good. I think it's well intended. What we have seen, however, is that it hasn't worked in the sense that it hasn't led to a diverse set of hires. There still are very few African-American coaches and league executives in the NFL, despite the Rooney Rule.
And in the past, have there been other minority NFL coaching candidates who have made allegations like this, that they've gone through this process and, it seems to have just been sort of a sham to check a box?
The NFL, like a lot of sports leagues, are very insulated entities. It's hard to sort of challenge the system. So Flores is doing something that we haven't seen, in the sense of just directly saying this whole thing is unfair, it's illegal, it's discriminatory, whatever word you want to use. We have heard grumblings in the past that candidates don't feel as if they've had the same sort of opportunity, but not to this level.
Now, how have other sports leagues been doing in comparison to the NFL in terms of having more black coaches and more black participation at the senior levels of their coaching teams and their staff?
Yeah, the NBA has done the best at that. And part of it is that many coaches were players. And I think that leads to a more diverse population pool for coaches. And there are increasingly executives of NBA teams that are black. And I think that it's a much more diverse group. But again, part of it is sort of the career trajectory of these things, that in the NBA, a coach often was a player. So that leads to a population pool that tends to be more black, whereas in the NFL, there are former players, but many of the former players that have ascended as coaches, at least head coaches, have been white, which of course invites the question of why.
Yeah, I mean, other than setting up some kind of quota system, what other options might the NFL have to create more black head coaches? I mean, after all, 70% of the players are black.
Having a black owner, I think, would be a good first step, right? That this is part of it is when there are these ownership meetings, there's no one in the room, at least among the lead owners, that is black. One challenge to all of this is that NFL teams are becoming so expensive that the number of people that can afford an NFL team is really small. The Denver Broncos are expected to be sold for about $5 billion, maybe more.
Yeah, $5 billion is a big number.
Yeah.
All right. Michael McCann, thank you for being on the show.
You got it. Thanks for having me.
That's it for this edition of Uptown Radio. We hope you enjoyed the show.
Our executive producer today was Rebecca Robinson. Leading our staff of reporters was senior producer Elliot Chaparelli.
Director Chantel Destra coordinated our studio production with David Newtown and Julian Abraham. Our web editor and assistant producer, Sarah Yokubaitis, got this stream live to the web.
Clara Sophia Daly delivered our local newscast, and Clara Grunnett presented our national and international news. Senior editor David Marquez and assistant editor Emily Schutz led our copy team. Day reporters Linnea Arden and Kelly Canaday brought you the latest on the ground in New York.
Our instructors, Sally Herships, Robert Smith, and Ben Shapiro, and Haley Zhao advised our staff. I'm Lucy Grindon.
And I'm Mark Gilchrist. Uptown Radio is live Thursdays at 4. Until next time, you can always find us at uptownradio.org. From all of us here at Uptown Radio, thanks for listening.